Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the next podcast from Wanda Curley that is brought to you by PM Powered, your consulting firm for project, program, and portfolio needs. I'm Wanda Curley, the presenter of this podcast, and your authority on project, program, and portfolio management needs. Feel free to contact me if you need anything. My name is Wanda. My email is wanda@pmpowered.com. So let's get started. We've been talking about failed and successful projects, but failed projects are easier to find, believe it or not. You would think that people would want to advocate their positive projects, but you can't find a whole lot of those online. So I've got 10 more projects that were failures for various reasons, but we'll look at it from the perspective of the people that bring the power to the project, and that is the people, specifically the project manager and the project team. So let's get started. Many of you probably have heard of this one, the Sony Betamax. I know I probably, if I look around my house, probably still have some Betamax items around the house. It was a complete failure. So Sony launched its cassette recording device known as Betamax in the mid-1970s. It lost the battle for market share to JVC's VHS technology, but Sony didn't stop making Betamax until 2016. Can you believe that? They were still making them up to 2 years ago. That's amazing to me. Before I go on, let me give credit where credit's due. This is from Workfront, and it's called Project Failure, 10 Famous Fails and What They Teach Us. I'm not going to go into the teaching part, but let's get going here. So why do you think they continue to do this? So let's read lessons learned. The story of Betamax has become nearly synonymous with failed marketing because it was innovative and hit the market before its competition did. Other products proved to be cheaper and better. What could have Betamax done better? Well, it could have been assessing the market continuously, understanding what was going on, and maybe tweaking its product to bring it back. Maybe it was just a matter of out-marketing. We've got to understand that in today's society, projects don't end once the project is done. You continually have to be assessing the project's failure or success when it reaches its end customer. And originally when this started, it started as a great success, but they lost valuable insight into the market. And to me, this is a failure of the variables. So it's the inputs and the mechanisms. So these are, let me go over this again. Inputs are what drive the project. So you constantly are getting inputs into the project, where mechanisms are where you have to make decisions about change or any other things. So while this was past the end of the project, it was still part of the project, and they weren't doing the marketing correctly. So the variables were starting to fail, and we see the one arm of the triangle starting to go down. So whoever took charge of this of the product failed on the triangle on the variable side. You constantly have to market, especially when you have a brand new system. And why would they continue going until 2016? Now, I don't understand. Maybe there was a niche market for it, and there probably was, or people trying to get things done because they had VHS, because they had Betamax, not VHS. So you got to totally understand your market. If you don't, then you lose it. Okay, let's go to the next one. This one's called New Coke. Maybe some of you remember when that was launched, and it was advertised as America's taste just got better. So after testing a new recipe on 200,000 subjects, which seems a little small if you're going to market to the whole United States and even the world, and finding that people preferred it over the traditional version, Coca-Cola unveiled New Coke in 1986. Sounds like a safe move? That was a totally wrong move. Product loyalty and old-fashioned habits got in the way, and people did not buy New Coke as expected. If I am I don't drink sodas, but if you are somebody that is wed to one product, such as Coke, and you've been drinking Coke all the time, it's going to be very difficult for you to change. And as they found out, many people didn't really like the new Coke. So maybe it was the 200,000, the demographics of that 200,000 that was wrong. Who knows? We would have to go back and look at that. But this product ended up costing the company $4 million in development and a loss of $30 million. That's a lot of money to any company. And they have backstock product that they can't sell. So while Coca-Cola certainly did market research, they missed the mark when it came to assessing customer motivations. Customer inputs is imperative in development and for your project to be successful. You need to ensure you have a way to gather comprehensive customer insight that gives accurate and realistic information. So where did they go wrong? It seems to me, and I'm not a marketing person by a long shot, that was one of those classes in school that I hated. But anyway, on this marketing perspective, it seems to me, again, that they missed a variable. They only looked at it for how much people like the taste. They didn't look at brand loyalty, and they didn't look at habits of people. If they had looked at that, they probably would have found out that most people that already drink Coke aren't going to shift over to the new Coke, unless maybe it's the younger generation that is not, has such a strong tie to one product. So again, the variables on this were missed after the product was launched. Again, the project was done, the project was successful, but the product failed. So was the project a success or a failure? In my mind, in today's environment, the project was a failure because it didn't take into account the whole marketing aspect. Let's go to the next one. And I had not heard about this one. I don't know where I was when this was happening. But Polaroid actually had instant home movies. And it was called Polavision. And you could record a video. It was only 2.5 minutes long. So that didn't give you a whole long time. It didn't have sound. But you could see it instantly. So it was just like a Polaroid, except this was a video. It was groundbreaking at the time, but the project only lasted 2 years. Polavision was revolutionary, but Polaroid dropped the ball when they failed to stay abreast with its developing marketing needs. If you listened to my podcast last week, you heard about Kodak and how Kodak failed and in fact went bankrupt. Polaroid is the same way. It didn't understand what the market was coming, what was coming in the market. They didn't look at digital. They didn't look at people could record on their phones now. And not only could they record, but they could hear what was being recorded. So who wants to see a video when there's no sound? So again, a variable was missed. The project was successful, but in the end, the project launched and the product was not successful. So again, is it a success? Is it a failure? Well, some would say the project was a success, but the overall marketing campaign was not. And it wasn't even the marketing campaign. It was failure to understand where the end customer and what technology was doing. So technology was going digital, Polaroid was not. And so they lost it and they're no longer here. So we just talked about Coke. Let's talk about Pepsi. Let's bring the two into account. Pepsi had a dramatic failure too. Again, I don't remember this one, but it could be that I since I don't drink sodas, I just kind of put it out of my mind. This one was called Crystal Pepsi. How many of you remember that? It was a clear cola, and it was marketed as Crystal Pepsi. And it was a hit at first, and people were very excited about the new version of an old favorite. But the fad wore off, just like fads do with everything. They become passé. It's not cool. It's not hip to do this. It's not an awesome product. Hey, I've got a Crystal Pepsi. Why aren't you drinking it? So it went by the wayside. So David Novak was the COO of PepsiCo during the project and didn't listen when bottlers told him the Crystal Pepsi flavor wasn't quite right. I learned that that you have to recognize that when people are bringing up issues, they might be right, he later said. So listen to all end customers. So the bottlers are an end customer, and if they're telling you there's something wrong with the product, why aren't you taking this input? This input is results. Results are output, but the output was wrong. And so variables were coming in and telling you that the output was wrong. So why aren't you listening to this? You have got to listen to this when the product is launched, because if you don't, the project is going to end up being a failure. And we're seeing this time and time again. So let's go to number 6 as failures. This is McDonald's Arch Deluxe Burger. So in 1996, and I do remember the launch of this, McDonald's put more than $150 million into advertising, more than it had ever done on any single campaign in its history. And it was for the new Arch Deluxe Burger. But they found out that customers weren't interested in the more grown-up, sophisticated menu launch option. They didn't look at the dynamic of their customer, and they forgot that people that don't go to McDonald's most likely are not going to go to McDonald's for a new burger. So this is another case. So the lessons learned, as pointed out, is that the importance of letting customers' data drive product strategy. If McDonald's had a more accurate picture of what its customers wanted, it could have saved millions in advertising and resources. A great way to stay on top of data is to choose a handful of key metrics to track. And I can't go on enough about establishing the correct key performance indicators. If all of these had KPIs that made sense to the product and to the people that support their organizations and their products, they would have seen that the KPIs were tracking in a downward cycle, and it might have been time to say, hey, we need to cut this off to minimize our losses. Again, the variable wasn't seen on this. So let's go to number 5. This is the Apple Lisa, and many of you may have heard about this. Lisa was the first desktop with a mouse. It cost $10,000. In today's term, that's $24K. And had just 1 megabyte of RAM. Can you imagine paying that much for a desktop with a wired mouse? Consumers weren't as interested as Apple anticipated. In this case, it was over-promising and under-delivering. As the 1983 ads, which featured Kevin Costner, depicted the Lisa as much more than it really was. So Apple learned a very big lesson on selling vaporware. If you don't tell the customer the truth, the customer, especially this savvy customers in technology, because all of those that bought it were very savvy in technology. And so the project was not even successful because it didn't have the results that were expected. But yet Mac decided to go, or Apple decided to go ahead and sell the product as if the project had been a success. That never, software companies have learned that that always is not a good thing. You cannot sell vaporware to your consumers because they will reject you and they will not like you. So the quality on this one was a failure. And quality is an input which drives the results. And since the input on the quality was terrible, the results, which is an output, was a failure. And they overpromised to the consumer and it failed. So they should have come back on their scope, which is an input, and to drive new results, which would have been better to the customer. So here it says transparency, as I said, matters. It may feel like a buzzword you hear all the time, but there's no better way to describe the lesson learned here other than that Apple was not transparent. We no longer live in an age where you can falsify capabilities. And back in those days, many, many software companies did that. Again, you hear me say the term vaporware. We used that a lot back then. Let's go to Project 4, the Levi Type 1 jeans. So in the early 2000s, Levi Strauss introduced the Type 1 jeans. It went to a younger generation. It had exaggerated features like buttons, stitches, and rivets. The company actually ran a Super Bowl commercial showing these jeans, and the consumer got totally confused. They didn't know what to do with this because the Levi's at that time were more of a a product that everybody just knew as blue jeans, and that's what people wanted, was just a standard pair of blue jeans. So they were a little bit ahead of the curve when doing all these different things with blue jeans. And because they didn't understand their market at that time and didn't understand the demographics of their market, so these are the variable inputs, the project, they had new jeans, but the project was a failure. Most likely, if they tried to sell them now, it would be more of a success because the demographics are changing rapidly with the millennials and the new Generation Z coming on. So what did we learn on this one? Well, we don't know what Levi's project management processes are like. One way to avoid confusion is to prove internal communication so that the final project has a clear message. This product didn't have a clear message. It didn't advertise as to who it was really marketing to. And when you're on the Super Bowl, you've got to be very clear about that. There's been other marketing campaigns on the Super Bowl that have been miserable failures as well. So they spent a lot of money, because we all know those Super Bowl ads are expensive, and they didn't understand the demographics of their clientele. So let's go to number 3, IBM PC Junior. IBM released its PC Junior in 1983 in an attempt to attract home computer users, but the PC Junior offered fewer features than its competitors and was twice as expensive as an Atari or a Commodore. IBM always tends to be very expensive and more expensive than its competitors. They saw this with the IBM ThinkPad, which is now Lenovo. They ended up having to sell it off because they just couldn't be competitive. Lenovo has been able to take the IBM ThinkPad and actually bring it to the customers in a way that is competitive with others. But what did IBM learn here? Well, it didn't learn a whole lot because it ended up bringing on the IBM ThinkPad, or maybe it did. But IBM had the right approach when it listens to users and provided what they were asking for, a new keyboard. Unfortunately, its response wasn't quite enough because the product was low quality and didn't help improve users' experience with the PC Junior. Well, yes, they wanted a new type of keyboard that worked better and more integrated with the system. But they, of course, wanted what was already there, and they expected a quality product from IBM because IBM is known for its quality. And since IBM didn't deliver on quality, the results were poor. And so those that were IBM tried and true were let down. And IBM learned a hard lesson on this one. So let's talk about a car. And this car, if any of you watch Back to the Future or any of the subsequent movies of Back to the Future, you'll know this one. This is the DeLorean, the DMC-12. It has gull-wing doors. Gold-plated models weren't enough to save the DeLorean DMC-12, which experienced problems throughout production, giving it a rough start. Also, John DeLorean, the company's founder, was arrested in 1982 on drug trafficking charges he incurred while trying to raise money to save the business. Even though he was found not guilty, it was too late for the Marty McFly famous car. So there was a series of hiccups on this one. The quality wasn't there because they couldn't do the production. So it gave it a rough start. And then the owner of the company also got into legal trouble, which is never a good thing for this. So there were input problems, there were variable problems, there were some quality problems. It doesn't say anything about the finance, but I'm going to state that it probably went over budget, so there were finance issues. So the input and control of finance weren't followed. And there are time critical issues because it didn't come out as the time that they thought it was. So what are the lessons learned? This one is still playing out, but is a great example of leveraging nostalgia and coming back bigger and better. So in 2016, a new DeLorean was announced and then delayed due to some legal issues. So again, he has the legal issues, although it has nothing to do about him. However, things are back on track and it's supposed to be released in 2019. So let's stay tuned and see what happens. Okay, let's go to the number 1. The number 1 is another car, and I'm sure many of you have heard of this and you've heard about the jokes around it. It's the Ford Edsel. Everybody thought this was going to be a success. Ford did extensive market research before it released the Edsel. It even did studies to make sure that the car had the right personality. But the research was done and the car was unveiled in 1957. Well, guess what happened? The market changed by the time they unveiled it. It had already moved to buying compact cars, which didn't include the Edsel. The Edsel was not a compact car. The Edsel also got some bad publicity that it had some quality issues. That turned out not to be correct. It was just people giving off some other things. But the Ford Edsel is the perfect example of the importance of speed to market. Many times we have software, we have products, and you want to be number one out in the market. So sometimes you have to scope back a little bit so you can get it out to the market in time. So that, again, they didn't understand the inputs. They had to listen to what was going on in the marketplace, and they weren't doing that. Ford lost a lot of money on the Edsel, and maybe even that was the start of the downfall of Ford, although Ford is coming back up now. So think about all of these items and think about whether your project truly ends at the end of the project. When you close out the project. Nowadays, that's not true. You as the project manager may not be on that project anymore, but you should be checking it out and seeing how well you did. Did you listen to all the variables? Did you listen to the end consumers? Did you understand the marketing perspective? Did you understand the studies that we're bringing to you? And maybe change was needed. And you decided to reject it because we as project managers don't like change. But sometimes change is good, especially if the demographics or the dynamics that are happening in the marketplace are changing rapidly. Then you may have to change your product. Or if it's absolutely essential that you get it out to market first, then maybe again you have to scope back so that you can release, and then you put in newer things as it's accepted in the marketplace. I'm Wanda Curley, and this podcast has been brought to you by PM Powered. PM Powered is a consulting company that can help you with your project, program, and portfolio needs. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. Please go to PM Current and follow me on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'd love to see you there. If you were a project manager on all of these, although I know some of these are dated, I would love to hear from you, especially on Betamax. That would be a great thing to hear as to what the marketing, or if you were a marketing person on any of these, please contact me at wanda@pmpowered.com. I'd love to speak to you about what were the successes and what were the failures in your mind. Although we listed all of these as failures, some of these had some good aspects to them. It's just something happened in the marketing. Again, thank you for coming to my podcast, and I'll see you next Monday.